First of all, thank you very much for being here. I almost didn't come because there was 2 other great talks, and I was like, kind of want to see them, but you know. Then you guys all came in here, and I was like, okay, fine. Let's talk about Android themes. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually say why I am doing this talk about Android themes. I've been an Android developer now for 4 years, and I know some of you have been longer or shorter, but in my 4 years, I feel like I was really, really lucky in the sense that I got to work in different types of kind of groups that all did Android development. So when I first started, it was me and 1 person on the back end. And then I had big companies. It was, you know, large-scale teams, departments. And you know, now I'm at like a startup that's pretty big for a startup, 45 people. So it's like very different worlds. And in all of these, in every single one of these projects, themes have been something we've been fighting with. So what happens is we start the project, we're all excited, we go and we start doing things, and then at one point somebody's like, hey, do you know that app bar, do you think we can remove it? And it's like, you know, all the developers like freeze. They're like, yes. And then you go and you do something with the styles and theme, and you're not sure what because it was on Stack Overflow, and you just copy and paste it, but it works, and you're like, okay, we got that. And then your designers come back and are like, hey, you know, in this other place, can we bring the app bar back? And then it's again. So the whole time you're working on this, as an afterthought, you're fighting with the theme instead of working with it. And I started thinking about this. I'm like, really smart people are doing Android. You know, they're the ones who are making the platform. They must have thought about this, I think. You know, I hope. You know, I was like, I bet it's not the problem with themes as much as it is a problem with me. And I think that's because when we start learning Android development, especially, you know, I'm from a Java background. So I first started concentrating on things that are very different than Java, like lifecycle, you know, network connectivity. You know, that never happened in applications where it wasn't as prevalent. And like the UI layer and the themes, they're like things you're like, okay, I'll figure it out once I get the hard part done. And you just kind of never concentrate on that, and you never learn it systematically. So I decided to change all that. So I go, you know, online and realize there's very, very few resources and documentations about styles and themes. So I think this is like the difficult thing, where there is a right way to do it. There is a way that makes it easier, and there's like almost no documentation. And in fact, like most of the people who know this stuff, they're like, oh yeah, just look at the Android source code, and it's really, really clear. Well, I'm like, well, sure I could, but is that really the best way to introduce this, especially for, you know, beginner Android developers? I don't know. It seems a little bit intimidating. So that's why I wanted to do this theme. And let's get started with that. So what are themes? Themes are ways of applying visual styles to views on an application or activity level. And this sounds very, very familiar to people who've done CSS before, you know, when you're working on the web and you're like, oh, let me apply this. And it's kind of a handy way of doing this. How do you do it? Well, this, if you use Android Studio and you create an application, this kind of happens for you automatically. Here you have the application in the Android manifest file. And there's a theme attribute, and it's style app theme right now. And we'll look into the details of that, what that means. But this was automatically created. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can also set one of the existing themes. So in the activity example I have, which is, let's say, a random detail activity in my application, I have Android theme, app theme, no action bar applied. And there it is. That's how you use themes. You guys are like, just love the faces. But you noticed when we were talking about themes that I was like, style / the theme. And now the question comes up, am I defining, you know, one unknown with another unknown? And yes, I am. So let's talk about styles first so we can understand themes better. What are styles? A style is a collection of attributes that specify look and feel for a view. And this is like you do in your XML for a layout file, or even programmatically, you apply different attributes to it. Well, this is a way of extracting that. And the cool thing about using styles is that with styles, you can then apply the same code into multiple places, so you don't have to do copy and paste. And with that, it becomes easier to maintain, just like methods. I mean, people who don't like styles, I think also don't like methods, and I hope I never work with you, because that is scary. Though I think I have worked with somebody like that before, but that's another story. There's other things about styles that kind of make them unique. One, they go in a separate XML file, completely different than your layout files. And this is a convenient thing because it kind of works as a tool for organization and cleanup. Kind of like when we're talking about Android and Java has a lot of boilerplate code. For a while I did not understand why that was such a big deal. I'm like, I type pretty fast. I can type all this. Well, it's not a problem for me. But then it hit me that that's not the point. The point is when you have a lot of boilerplate code and somebody goes and changes something, it's really, really hard for you to notice and say, oh, this thing was changed. Because you just kind of start skimming paragraphs of text and you don't notice it. So the less code you have, the more obvious the changes or the differences are. And I think that's critical in both styles and also in Kotlin and any other places. And then just because they're also kind of in the resource world, they go really well with colors and dimensions, again, for the reusability and for having everything defined in one place. And last, I know this is a little bit of a more kind of naming things is hard. But when you name styles well, sometimes they can also act as almost a comment about what are you trying to do. Maybe the style will provide you with information about the specific button or text, just because of how it's named. So here's an example of a layout file that has 2 buttons on it. Well, my example has 2 buttons, but I want you to use your imagination and imagine this is a layout file that has maybe 10 buttons on it. And they're styled the same visually, except of course the text is different. Now, I do want to pause here and just mention that if you do have a layout that requires 10 buttons, please hire a designer. That's probably not the kind of views you want to create, but let's hypothetically. And I mean, if you do have a designer who tells you 10 buttons, maybe get a new designer, but anyway. So how do styles help with this? Here in my styles.xml file in resources, I'm defining a style called my app button. And all the attributes I applied to the layout view, I'm applying in my style. Then in my layout file itself, shrinks and becomes just 2 buttons with a style applied to it and the text, which is the unique part of it. So much cleaner, much easier to read and understand. So what are some of the properties of styles? One, styles can use inheritance to define attributes of their parent. And you can inherit from styles that you've created yourself, like my button style that I did in the earlier example, or you can do some of the platform styles. And what does that look like? Here we go. I'm looking back at my styles.xml file, and I have my app button again. And I realized that I actually have 2 types of buttons in my application. One's a primary button, the other one's a secondary button, maybe for cancel or dismiss. And I want them to have different background colors, but everything else is the same. So you can see in my primary button style, I've defined a parent as my app button. So the name is the same as the name I've defined in my original style. And then I set a background, which is different. And I do this for both of them. On the right, you see the actual layout file. And here we've just assigned the different styles, the primary button style and the secondary. There's another way of doing inheritance. And this is one of the things that I wish I knew why there's a way of doing it 2 ways. But you can also define inheritance by, instead of using the parent tag, you can do it by the naming convention. So if you look at my second style, it says my app button dot primary button. This is the exact same thing as saying primary button and then parent my app button. So there is an advantage to doing it this way, and that is sometimes it's a little bit more clear. Again, when we're talking about styles being used as descriptions for what's going on with that button, now I know something a little bit more, and I know the inheritance a little bit of it too, right, where it comes from. The disadvantage of this is if you have like really big apps, and I've worked in a few big corporate apps, these get really, really, really long, and the names become less and less meaningful, and then you have like these huge lines, and it almost defeats the purpose. So just take a look at what you're doing specifically and decide whether what's right for you. But do stick with one way. Don't change it. That gets very confusing. You can, when you're using style with inheritance, you can also override attributes. They don't have to be unique in the parent and the child. So here, I have a primary button and style, and I've applied it. And in my layout file itself, I'm defining a new color for this. So actually, the layout file's color application will be the one that shows up. This button will end up being red. And how does all that work? So pretty much whatever you have in the theme gets overridden with whatever's in the style. That gets overridden in the layout, and then whatever you assign programmatically. That also is, I'm seeing cameras came out. I swear I will share these slides. Yeah, you don't have to take pictures. There is this one big trap that people fall when they start using styles. And this is a little bit hard to explain. It's almost one of those lessons you have to learn the hard way. But I'm going to try. And this is, try to don't reuse styles just because they have the correct attributes when the functionality or the application of those styles are going to be very, very different. What do I mean by this? I know that's like very confusing, but so let's take a look at this. And this is a simple example, but let's go ahead. Here I've defined my style, and again, being a developer, I'm really great at naming things. I don't recommend you naming things my style. So here we've defined text color, this accent color, and then a text size, which is 14. And then I'm looking at it, and I'm like, hey, I actually need a heading. And that's exactly the kind of parameters I need. This is perfect. I set the background color that's a different color, and we're like, okay, it's gone. Then I realize I need a button, and my button actually also has that same text color and text size. So I'm like, cool, inheritance. So now the button also inherits from my style. And let's say we have a ton of different button styles because, again, it's that 20 button application that I'm working on, and this time all of them look different. And then all of a sudden I go back and realize that I need another heading, and this time it's a detail heading. Well, the detail heading is like the heading, except the text size is different, and we just talked about how you can override parameters, right? So I'm like, okay, well, this text size should be 20, so that's fine, I'll do it this way, and still be cool. And then you go on and you realize you need a detail subheading, and then you're like, oh, and this one, the text size is different again, but the background color, which I set in the heading, that's also wrong. But you can't go and fix it in the top level because buttons also inherit from that. So instead of using styles to help you, you've created this mess. And then in a large project, it gets bad enough that nobody knows what uses what, and it's hard to trace. And everybody, instead of going and trying to fix it or clean it up, they just create another new style that inherits. And then you're like, I don't know what to do. And this is when the names get really long, and it's a disaster. But it happens with style. So be careful, be smart about it. In this situation, the parent for the heading and the button should have probably been different. If it was, I could have restructured it in a way that makes more sense. There is one big limitation of style. This is very different than CSS, if you guys were already thinking about it in that way. And that is, you cannot apply more than one style per view. Except you can. There's always an exception. And there is this one special exception, and we pretend it doesn't exist. And actually, A lot of even like very senior developers who've been doing Android, they were like shocked because I was like, it's like, oh yeah, and I'm going to talk about the text, appearance, and they're like, what's text appearance style? Like, what is this? And I'm like, okay. So what this is for any class that extends text view, that's like edit text or something like that, you can set a style in the attribute text appearance. What this does is it sets the style for the text itself. So there's only a limited number of attributes that you can use into it. So in this example, I have two styles. One's like for my title, and I've set a background and gravity, because I want it centered in my title. Then I have the title text style, which is, if you notice, a lot of the attributes are with text, start with text. That's a good indication that you can use that. So I'm setting text size, text color, text style. Then, in my layout file, I have one style set as style/title, and then I have set the Android text appearance, which is style/title text. So it's a really cool trick, and I think this helps again with not having those really complicated hierarchies we were talking about, that are just, this helps separates that. And maybe you do want only 3 different types of fonts, but you want different backgrounds and things like that, and that can help you with that. So now if you remember this, we have to add one more thing to it. So the theme can be overridden by the text appearance style, which can be overridden by the style, and then it continues on. So that means that if you set text color in the text appearance style, and then also the style one will win. So this is totally not about styles and themes, but I just had to put this in because this is another area where I've had so much struggle with any organization I've worked with. And this is how to use the colors resources, which are great to use. So like styles, color resources are great for reusability and helps get you organized in theory. But what ends up happening is everybody comes in there and creates a name for the function and not the color. And I think that also comes from CSS, because in CSS that's actually recommended for you to do that. But so you come up with a color like standard title dark gray color, and that's like one of the better names I've seen actually. And again, it becomes very, very confusing very quickly because you're like, well, I have not a title, but I have some text. Well, I don't want to use the standard title dark gray color for that. Maybe it's different. So you add something, and then I'm sure some of you guys know, there's always conflicts in the XML files, even if it's like somebody added 2 colors. Those aren't usually handled well. So then you're like merging things, and you're like, oh, I have so many colors. So you end up with this like chaos. So what I recommend instead is to kind of name it by the function. But as you can see, that this has a huge problem, which means we reuse colors. So if you look at the section below, we are using the same gray color for both of those. So how do you handle that? From my personal experience, and this isn't like recommended anywhere, it's just something that I found out works, is doing it like this. In the Colors.xml file, I define a palette of colors that are being used. Then below it, hopefully with some notes or comments, you actually apply those colors. So in the color application section, we don't use any defined colors. I mean, we don't define them, we just use the predefined palettes. So this is one we've caught designers, before when we're like adding the colors to the palette, and they were like, this gray you're using is only slightly different than the other gray. Are you sure? And the designers are like, no, you can just reuse it. And I'm like, yes, that fixes the complexity, the mess. And then the other thing I recommend is like here I named them after like dark purple, red, orange. That might not be the best way to do it, because what is orange? I just recommend naming those with however if you have a design document and sometimes they define codes or call colors things, just define them that way. Some way that works as a reference back to the designs, or I don't know. I think I've mainly found like either names, like I work for Haya, so we have a Haya purple color. So I might change the purple to that or something like that. Yeah, but this will really, really help with your organization. And people are skeptical a little bit at first, but then when they do it, nobody wants to go back to just a crazy colors file. OK. So now you guys know everything there is about styles, and we can talk about themes. Themes look like styles. They look exactly like styles. You write them in the styles.xml, but they're not. They're different in both scope and the attributes you use. And there are many predefined themes that you can use, and there's no, I mean, you can't do that with styles. And Android Studio definitely does help you get started with them. So what I mean is, again, this is just boilerplate. If I just go to the stable version of Android Studio, I create new application, I'll get in my Android manifest the theme set @style app theme. And if I actually go and open my styles document, I'll see it's empty except for this little app theme that I have here. And notice the parent. The parent is theme AppCompat light dark action bar. I know it's a mouthful, but this is one of the themes that are defined by the system. So it automatically says, hey, your application has this system theme applied to it. And you could have just taken that and applied it directly in the Android manifest. But what it does when you move it to the style, it lets you customize it then quickly. And again, Android Studio helps you get started with that by suggesting that you can define the colors, at least, for the theme. So it comes automatically with the color primary dark, and color accent for you to define. And there you go. You change those to what you like, and you're starting to customize your themes. But of course, you can do more with them. Like I mentioned, there's different attributes that apply to themes. But you can just look those up, and I have a reference here. And like I said, I'll share the deck, so you can then go and check it out. And you can have, for example, window background. This is not an attribute you could use in a style, because it kind of doesn't make sense in a style, right? The reason we have, like, you couldn't have background in a theme, because it would then be the question of a background for what? Would it be a background for, a specific, I don't know, text view? Would it be the background for the app toolbar, or what? So the naming is a little bit different here. And then once you've defined and customized your theme, what you can do is start adding the styles you've created in the same document to your theme. So now what I've done is I've said Android button style. That's one of the attributes I can do in a theme. And I've defined a style somewhere, and I've applied it. So what this means and why it's different than using just styles in your layout is I get this for free. I get this automatically. Whenever I create a button, it's going to look like this. So it's an upfront cost to set everything up in the way you want it, but then it's kind of like you have consistent layouts and views. And then it goes the other way around too. You can access certain values from the theme in either your layouts or your styles. So look at the edit text. Here I've said Android text color, and I've used this notation $ATTR. That's just how you mention that it's the themes. And I've used color primary. Now this is kind of a cheating example, because I just showed you that we kind of define the color primary up above, in that style. So technically you could access it that way too. But I mean, this isn't just for things you've defined. So in second example with the toolbar, I've set the height to action bar size. And that's not something I've defined anywhere yet. This is whatever the theme defined it to be. So here, my toolbar will be that exact size that's defined by the theme. I also want to quickly talk about AppCompat. So with material design, things look a certain way. So you can use some of the platform AppCompat themes to get, for example, material design look on older versions of Android. And just like the regular themes, you can either use just the themes straight, or you can customize them. And there is one more thing, like if for example, you want a theme that's not in AppCompat, you can use a little trick, if you know how to do this, where you can have different style, in your resources, you can have your values version 21, and you can have your regular values. And if you notice, the styles I've defined, the parents are a little bit different. So for versions that can support it here, I'm setting the parent to be theme.material.light. For older versions, I'm using theme.light. And you can do this to have, just different, your newer versions of Android would have the material theme, and the older ones would still be supported. The problem with doing it this way is you do have to, copy and paste the code in 2 places to do this. But if you really don't want the AppCompat themes and you want, your newer versions to look a certain way, you can use this as a trick. So, what are the available themes? I copy and pasted it, and then funnily enough, it just went off the screen, and I was like, I love it. I'm going to keep it like this, because this shows you that there's a lot of themes. And this was what was intimidating me at first when I was like, I have to understand themes, because I'm like, I just don't get it. So I did a little bit of exploration, and originally my talk was going to be all about the differences between these. And then, shockingly enough, I realized that they're named really well. There's not that much to explore about it. I mean, the difference between dialogue and dialogue.noActionBar, what do you think is the difference? Yeah. So I was like, whoa, I guess we're not talking about that. But I do want to show you an example, just to kind of give you the idea. And what I did is I created this layout file. It has just a few